interacting with it. And we can explain this by drawing a picture with the access points and the log attacker laptop. But let's not do that. Let's go for something more dramatic. Let's have a Star Wars analogy. So here is your station, and we're looking to associate with one of those access points. Yes, and all of those little access points out there. And one of them is actually a log access point. Could you hold this is the Imperial March, if you can hear it. Right. And sooner than you know, you're within the tractor beam and you're being served with a nice little layer 2 kernel exploit. And, this is no moon, not really. And the access point goes, too bad. So, thank you. That's enough Star Wars for now. So the idea is then you could use fingerprinting of the access point by timestamps or by any other means, really, before you start accepting more complex data, more complex frames from it, by observing that this thing has a happy clock inside and it's actually broadcasting that clock. And what you can do is you can just see that it's not the Tatooine that you're looking for, but instead something completely different, a small moon maybe, and desist from approaching any closer. So, how can you do that? You can do that by observing that there is a timer on the card, and you can query that timer in your card for the very accurate time stamping of what you're getting, of the frames that you're capturing, beacon frames included. And the reason for that timer, and this is 64-bit and microsecond resolution, is that the clients adjust their timer from this beacon timer to stay in sync with the AP. And the collision avoidance being such a delicate dance with the virtual carrier sensing and all that, that they need to do this. And so your RF chipset actually knows how to synchronize your clock with an external clock. And so we have a high precision set of timestamps to go by. And this is a known fact. And so coming back to this paper that offered the fingerprinting mechanism, they observed that these are approximately the clock skews that you expect to find on your Linksys and your Netgears. We mostly use Arubas at Dartmouth, but the picture looks the same. And so you've got clock skews on the order of maybe 64 to maybe 10 parts per million. And these, of course, vary normally because the clock on the access point itself varies, even its skew varies, and the variation is 0.30, 0.70, so less than 1 part per million. And the clock skews themselves are on the order of 10 to 60, so you can actually measure it quite accurately, and you can be sure that it stays within the same region. The error of measurement is not really that large. Okay. And the conclusion that the paper, a very nice paper, and I urge you to read it if you're interested in this, the conclusion was that spoofing this was very hard. A microsecond clock is a lot better than what you get on your laptop. Microsecond level events are much better than microsecond event resolution is much better than you can hope to do with your regular system clock. And so what they said was, even if you know a skew that you need to match, then, and if you inject beacons and modify the timestamps in those beacons, even so, you're never fast enough. And in fact, what you're going to get is a variation of 100 parts per million, whereas on the actual clock skew, you would expect 0.3 to 0.7. And so it's very, very hard to fake this with a software RF mode injection, right? So this is really good for the defender, not so good for the attacker. You know, you're given away by your clock. Except it's not exactly so. So the question is, can we spoof clock skews with the cheap hardware, or the not so cheap hardware like a Ubiquiti Atheros card? And there are some interesting things to observe about how actual cards behave. Actual cards, when we put them in monitor mode, after they've been associated with one of our APs, exhibit this interesting behavior. They continue to update their timer as if they stayed associated. So this is what the firmware does. I talked to Joshua Wright and Michael Ostrom and Osman, and they think that this is likely a firmware bug, but whatever it is, we can use it. So what that meant for us is the skew of that AP that the card was associated with before we put it into monitor mode, that skew was a 0, which means that we can actually spoof that skew because we have a timer on the card that's synchronized with this AP, even though we're in monitor mode. And what actually happens if you kill that AP, right? The TSF timer of the card itself switches to its own clock and starts drifting slowly away, which again suggests an interesting firmware piece of logic that may or may not have been meant to be there. But anyhow, Med Wi-Fi driver gives us virtual interfaces. And one of those interfaces can be in station mode, synchronizing itself with an AP of our choice. And the other can be a master mode interface, which will mislead one of those stations into associating with us, even if they are doing some sort of a little skew fingerprinting measurement. And so the question is, can we just get that master virtual interface to emit our spoofing beacons for free, whereas the station interface would do the synchronization? It will look something like this, right? Here is the actual AP, and here is the Atheros card, and here is the station, or the wireless IDS, and it will listen to our beacons, and it will go like, it looks okay. It's one of those skews we know. It's one of those clocks we know and like. And inside, we're going to have a management interface, a managed node interface. And that managed node interface will update our TSF timer register. And our virtual AP interface is going to emit beacons synchronized to that clock skew. And it will be indistinguishable for the station from the original AP by that measure. And in reality, I hate Max. In reality, something other than that will take place. So the station will be tricked into communicating with us, and we'll be able to send it a crafted probe response or a crafted authentication response with the attendant crypto and all that. Okay. Pity it doesn't work. And from this point on, the effort became like one of those games of snakes and ladders, right? You see the way to the top, and you kind of start climbing, and then there's a snake, and you're like back to square one. Except in this case, the snakes were fatter, and the ladders were fewer. And actually, this was found out by my student, Chrysil. He discovered that the snakes and ladders game actually came from India, his homeland. And it was an old game that was supposed to teach the children about the virtues and vices. And the virtues lead you up and the vices bring you down. And as such, it was brought over to England and used for the same purpose. And in the end, it ended up in the cereal books. But, this is the snakes and ladders right there. So here's the ladder. MedWi-Fi already has support for multiple virtual interfaces. And those interfaces can be bridged, so you can have a virtual AP and the virtual station. And it almost looks like it's going to work for free, well, except not quite. The virtualization is not fully virtualized. When we looked in the code, we figured that we found out that first you won't be able to actually create a host AP after the station, after you've done your synchronization. So it only goes into that node if a station, if the AP is already there. And secondly, you can only run the chip in station mode if you create it as a station. So this is not so great. So that means we need to mess with the driver, and this is what the driver looks like. So the driver may be in the station or the AP mode in and of itself. And in the station mode, it's got a function in the firmware. The card has got a function in the firmware that updates the timer from the beacon timestamp. And this you cannot really, this you don't really need to control from the driver. So this is a firmware thing, it seems. And when you're in the AP mode, it will go inserting timestamps into the beacons that you put in the beacon send queue, and it will keep doing that in and of itself, and so it will use its own clock, not the clock that that the station is receiving. So these two functions are actually divorced in firmware, and it doesn't quite work this way as we hoped. So what we have to do is to patch the driver to give this process a little help. First of all, in both modes, we have this add receive management frame function. And in the AP mode, we have the add beacon send, and we can read and write registers through the HAL functions. And this is what we're going to do to marry those two functionalities. The driver will set it to the operating mode of being an AP. This is, again, a firmware thing. And it will emulate all the other modes, such as the station mode for the virtual interface in software. And so the TSF timer in this AP operating mode is not updated from real AP beacons, whichever beacons you receive. And so we're